Everybody. My name is Gavin Rice. I am Head of Political Economy here at Onward. Welcome to the Onward Hub for our final Onward event. So thank you very much to all of you for being here today and to those of you who've been supporting our events programme throughout what has been quite a busy and exciting conference schedule for Onward. I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Philp, the Right Honourable, who is, well, he requires no introduction, but is the Shadow Home Secretary, also the Member of Parliament for Croydon South, equally importantly, formerly served in government as Minister of State for Crime, Policing and Fire, and previously served as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. We're very, very pleased to have you with us here this evening, Chris. Thank you for coming.
Gavin, it is a huge pleasure to be here. This is my penultimate engagement, so I'm almost on the home straight.
Right, so I'm going to be in the bar half an hour before you, basically. Excellent, fantastic. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have, since it is that time of day, just a slightly more relaxed, free-flowing Q&A. We'll just have a little bit of a fireside chat with no fire, and then we'll, most importantly, come to you guys in the audience so that you can ask Chris your questions.
I have one question. Yes. Is this gin or vodka in here?
I wish, Chris, I wish. Can we get some, actually? OK, Chris, this is great. You're in the Home Affairs brief. It's not been an unbusy week or two in your particular brief. How are you finding it, and what's the reaction you've been getting at conference?
So the reaction has generally been pretty good because we've come out fighting during this conference. We've been announcing, bold and radical policies on an almost daily basis. Starting off at the weekend with our, I think, historic decision on ECHR withdrawal. But that was an announcement not done on a whim, not shooting from the hip, not sketched on the back of a fag packet like some people I could mention. It was properly thought out, based on a 200-page analysis by one of the country's leading KCs. So when we announced that ECHR policy, there were no... What was interesting, you may notice two things. The first of all is there are no holes in it. Right? No journalist has succeeded in picking any holes, legal or otherwise, in our policy. Not on the Good Friday Agreement, not on the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, not on the Windsor Framework, not on what it means for cooperation, not on the question of how do we continue to protect rights in this country. No holes in that at all. And the second thing is, as a parliamentary party, we've remained completely united on that ECHR announcement. There have been no sitting MPs who have publicly criticised it, or certainly no one that's left as a result. So we've managed to maintain unity on this really quite bold and radical policy. And I'll tell you what, a year ago, this would not have been achievable. So that, I think, was a landmark moment in our political journey back into government, I should add. And then we launched our Borders Plan on Sunday, a plan to end illegal migration. I can go through some of the details if you want, but outside the ECHR, it enables us to make sure anyone entering the country illegally can be removed within a week. And there are lots of other policies there as well, enabled by ECHR withdrawal. And I made the crime and policing announcements this morning in the hall. Hopefully you were there. 10,000 extra police, tripling the rate of stop and search to take knives off the street, and intense hotspot patrolling of the 2,000 most dangerous neighbourhoods in the country. And the reaction that I've got around here, and actually from journalists as well, is positive, because they can see that now the Conservative Party is back in business. We are serious about fixing our country's problems, and we've got the detailed and credible plans to do it. And in my view, we are the only party to offer that combination. There we are. What did I tell you?
We can all go now. So, I mean, as a kind of humble policy analyst, I've been of the view that our relationship with the ECHR needed serious reform so that we could stop illegal immigration and, or equally importantly, deport foreign national offenders for quite some time. It's not something I relish, but I think that's the view that many of us arrived at a while ago. But the party's only got there now. What do you think has led Kenny, yourself, the Shadow Cabinet to arrive at this position? What, if you were to talk to a fellow Conservative, lifelong Conservative member who's not yet there yet or doesn't yet hold that view, what's the thinking, what's the logic, and why at the present time? Yeah,
well, so my own sort of journey on the ECHR started actually some years ago when I was in the Home Office as a minister, and I was designing a piece of legislation, which was the Nationality and Borders Bill, and I wanted to make it very tough on asylum claims. I wanted to essentially raise the threshold to mean you've really got to prove that you really are in danger of persecution somewhere before you will get asylum. In my view, at the time, and I think it's still true, it's far too easy to make up some half-cooked claim under the advice of some immigration lawyer getting paid for with taxpayers' money under immigration legal aid to cook up some half-baked claim, and an immigration tribunal judge, who, as we know now, was probably an open borders activist a few years beforehand, then grants the claim. And I designed this piece of legislation and had these new ideas to really change that. And I was advised both by internal Home Office lawyers, and I then got it checked externally, because I didn't want to just take their word for it. So I've got an external barrister who I chose to opine as well. And they said the legislation I was proposing would be in contravention of ECHR, would end up getting trumped by ECHR Article 3. And at that moment, when I got that advice, I thought to myself, well, you're telling me, I'm being told, as an elected member of Parliament, in a government with a majority of 80 odd at the time, that I can't legislate in the way that I know the public would want me to, in the way that I want to as a minister, because of the ECHR. And at that point, I thought, right, this is no good anymore. I then came across individual cases where the ECHR was used by judges both here and in Strasbourg to stop the government doing even things that were allowed under our own law, primarily amongst which is deporting serious foreign criminals. Now, I think every single foreign criminal should be deported. If you're a national of another country and you commit a crime here, you should go back to your country of origin. Just as if if I committed a crime somewhere else, I would expect to be sent back to the UK at the end of my prison sentence. And there were so many cases I saw where serious criminals weren't being deported because of the ECHR. I could give you millions of examples, well, not millions, I'll give you thousands of examples, but I'll give you one. There was a paedophile from Zimbabwe who should have been returned at the end of his prison sentence to Zimbabwe, but a court said, no, if he goes back there, because he is a convicted paedophile, he might get treated with, quotes, some hostility. Well, I mean, yes, and what about the rights of children in the UK to be protected from that dangerous paedophile? The judge paid no attention whatsoever to their rights. I remember when we were trying to send some people back to another country, and various human rights lawyers managed to spring some of them out, again using mainly ECHR Article 3. And one of the people taken off that charter flight back to his country of origin, 6 months later, murdered someone with a knife on the streets of southeast London. And I don't know what the human rights lawyer had to say about the person who he murdered. What about their rights to be protected? So that's kind of what did it for me. Now, in terms that we then, Kemi sort of quite rightly said, look, I don't want to just shoot from the hip and just announce we're going to leave. She said, I want to get this checked out properly. And she asked Lord Wolfson to basically advise on whether we could do certain things in the ECHR, the most important of which was get control of our borders, but there were like 4 other tests as well. Look after our veterans was another. The prosperity test, which was about being able to give consent to oil and gas and that sort of thing. And David Wolfson's 200-page bit of advice makes it clear that you can't get control of the borders back while inside the ECHR. Now, I kind of knew that already from painful experience in the Home Office, but most people and most members of Parliament haven't had that experience, and they, I think, just needed someone of David Wolfson's eminence and obvious integrity to give them that view. And now we've got it. I mean, I don't want to go to open the doors too much, but there were some colleagues in the Shadow Cabinet and certainly in the wider parliamentary party who were not convinced of the case that I just made, and just hearing me say it to them wasn't enough. They needed to see it kind of proven by a barrister who's very, very well respected. And the Wolfson report has done that, and that's why we got to the position this weekend where we could announce the policy without causing splits. And unity, I think, is quite. I mean, I wouldn't have said it's a necessity, but it is desirable, and we've got here united, and that is a strength.
And of course, quite famously, the very respected former Supreme Court Justice Lord Sumption as well came out in The Spectator some time ago, making the same view.
Exactly. And indeed Richard Eakins. So Richard Eakins is Professor of, I think, International Law at Oxford University. He has the same view. So you've now got, this very good bit of advice from David Wolfson. It is an amazing piece of work, by the way. I mean, if you can bear to read it, do. It's an amazing piece of work. Former Supreme Court judge saying the same thing, and you've got the Professor of Law at Oxford, and even former Labour Home Secretaries like Jack Straw and David Blunkett. They don't quite say we should leave, but they acknowledge the problem, and they recognise that the way the system works today is not functional or acceptable at all. Even they are recognising the problem.
People say politics is the art of the possible, and I think sometimes, to me, the legal profession can be the art of taking things that are possible and making them impossible. And some of my legal friends tell me that even if we left the ECHR, there might still be remaining issues with our membership of the Refugee Convention. Have you thought about that at all?
Yes, we have. So first of all, the best lawyers. Any of you who have ever had the misfortune to need to use lawyers? I should have checked if there are any lawyers here before saying that. The best lawyers give you solutions, right? You say, I'd like to achieve something. Can you please explain to me legally how I can do it? Right? They're the best lawyers who give you solutions. Lawyers you encounter in government often do the reverse and just explain why you can't do things. And as a minister, you've got to try and blast through that. So it's not just the ECHR. The ECAT Treaty, the European Convention Against Trafficking,
right,
as incorporated by the Modern Slavery Act 2015, is problematic as well, because that prevents people with a vaguely plausible sounding claim from being deported. And I think actually it's cooked up modern slavery claims that have probably caused the current government, so much difficulty with their French scheme. I think it's the reason they've only sent 7 people to France so far under their absurd gimmick one in, one out scheme, which turns out to be 11,000 people have arrived since it was announced and only 7 have gone. It's not really one in, one out. It's 11,000 in and 7 out. On the Refugee Convention, again, Lord Wolfson's report addresses this, and his advice is that one can remain in the Refugee Convention, but redefine in domestic law where the asylum threshold is, answer very, very high, and if people arrive illegally, you can basically send them somewhere else that's safe and be compliant. He advises we should legislate to say our courts should essentially have no regard to the Refugee Convention as they interpret those laws, but we've sort of reserved our position and said if it turns out in practice the courts find some sneaky way around that, then we will then obviously leave it. I would just finally observe that the 2 countries that have been most successful in combating illegal immigration, Australia in 2013, and by the way, Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister, is around somewhere today. I spoke to him yesterday evening. They did it. And the United States of America have done it this year. They have reduced illegal immigration over the Mexican border by 80 to 90% in the last 6 months. I discussed that with Vice President J.D. Vance just a few weeks ago. Australia and the USA are both in the Refugee Convention, and they have both been able to do that. We can as well.
One of the themes of this conference has been rebuilding trust with the public, and one of the areas in which, when we commission polling work and that sort of thing, the public feel most betrayed is over the issue of net migration in particular, in addition to the illegal issue, because that is something that the government quite literally can control. You can control what the rules are. We were just in the same event together, and I won't name any names, but one of the speakers seemed to suggest, if it was a former Conservative of some kind, seemed to suggest that we brought immigration numbers down when we obviously didn't. So there was a little bit defending the record when perhaps I didn't feel as though that was quite right. Boris Johnson, only a couple of weeks ago, was questioning the ONS data, and it was slightly perhaps making some excuses. Do you think the party has yet got to a place where it is really honest with itself so that it can be honest with the public?
Well, I certainly think that is where we now are. And in my speech this morning, I said very clearly and very honestly that the net migration numbers, the migration numbers, under successive governments, but including, perhaps even especially, the most recent one, those numbers were far, far too high. We told the British public the numbers were going to get brought down, and they weren't. And that was a massive mistake. We need to acknowledge that. And we need to explain that under a future Conservative government, that will never, ever happen again. And more than that, we need to explain how we're going to do that. And the way we're going to do that is having a binding annual cap on migration set by Parliament, voted for transparently, where Parliament says each year what the inward migration number will be, perhaps for different visa routes, family, work and so on, and set a limit. And when that limit gets set, just stop issuing any more visas. In combination with that, we'd want to increase all the salary thresholds a lot to make sure that we have just a small number of highly skilled people coming in. And by being honest about the mistakes of the recent past and being clear about how we're going to fix them, I think we can rebuild trust and win again. Because there are no other parties, and Labour have no interest in fixing this. Reform don't have the detail or the specificity. So I think we can rebuild trust and win. But it does require honesty on that level, and you were, I think, searingly candid and honest in your commentary on this in the panel we just participated in. I think if we are honest, and if we do explain how this will be fixed, then we can rebuild trust again.
One of the kind of elephants in the room on migration policy is the fact that the cohort of migrants that came here from 2021 onwards, when the rules changed, which is online, is being referred to as. Is being referred to as the Boris wave, maybe on the cusp of getting indefinite leave to remain. Some people in the room might be familiar with what that is, some may not be. Can you talk us a little bit through about the party's thinking on that?
Yeah, that's right. So under the current rules, once someone has come into the country and been here for 5 years, they become eligible for this thing called ILR, indefinite leave to remain, which, as the name suggests, means the person can then stay here on a permanent basis. And the only thing that really undoes that is committing a criminal offence, which should then, in theory, trigger removal. There are very few checks done at the 5-year point prior to granting ILR. Now, we are concerned, as Gavin just said, that the large numbers of people who arrived from 2021 onwards will very shortly become eligible for ILR. And that's why, so I want to be constructive and think of solutions. So I tabled amendments in Parliament about 4 or 5 months ago to, firstly, increase the qualification period from 5 years to 10 years. So that gives you a kind of breathing space. And then secondly, introduce quite stringent qualification requirements before you can get ILR, to say you should never have claimed benefits or become dependent on the state, never have committed any criminal offence, obviously, because I think all foreign criminals should be removed, and to say you should be earning over a certain level to demonstrate that a contribution, an economic contribution, is being made. And only if those conditions are met would the person then receive indefinite leave to remain. That would essentially address the problem that you're pointing to. Now, it's interesting, Labour voted against that in Parliament, what I just described, but they then adopted a sort of a watered-down version of it, and which I think does involve some element of time extension to 10 years. So I think they did that in response to our proposal. So we've managed to actually, even though we're in opposition, and even though we lost the vote then, we have actually managed to move government policy. So I'm personally quite pleased that what I did a few months ago has actually now changed policy. And now the Labour Party have moved to the 10-year point that will generate the respite, provided that it applies to people who are here already. So we need to watch very carefully to ensure this Labour policy applies to people here already and not just to people who arrive in the future. So there is a solution to this problem, which I came up with, and I'm going to be pushing Labour constantly to adopt it. Because I believe in politics as a way of getting things done, not just as a way of grandstanding and shouting from the sidelines, as some other parties do.
Well, on that, I'm sure you'll have seen Reform had their own announcement on reforming indefinite leave to remain, and then proceeded not to publish that document in the public domain, at least that I've seen. So it's good to hear that there's some more detailed thinking going on in the Conservative Party.
Well, we actually tabled amendments. We've actually tabled legislative amendments in Parliament and forced votes on them. Yeah. You don't get any more detailed and specific than that.
No, absolutely. Just moving on from immigration itself, one of the kind of emerging themes of this kind of period of Labour government seems to be what's going on our streets, not only in terms of crime, but also in terms of the rise of extremism, anti-Semitism not going properly challenged and checked, particularly with things like the Palestine Action protests. Obviously, we've had horrific events in Manchester as well that we don't all know all the details of that case. Is this something that worries you as a Conservative? And I know, obviously, the party's policy review process as a collective is ongoing. But do you have any thoughts on how a future Conservative government would seek to challenge the rise of those issues? Yes.
I mean, it's deeply concerning. I mean, the fact that just a few miles from where we're sitting now, there was a terrorist atrocity committed at 9:31 last Thursday morning is just appalling. It appears to me, anyway, that the motive was Islamist extremism. And I am concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism on our streets and the prevalence of extremism. And there's no question in my mind the government needs to show a lot more leadership on this issue. We need to have zero tolerance for extremism and anyone who expresses support for terror. There are apparently marches going on in London today where, on the second anniversary of the October the 7th massacre, and I'm told, I was told by Andrew Marr earlier this afternoon, that some of the people at those marches were openly expressing support for Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation who deliberately murdered and raped innocent people 2 years ago today. They're a prescribed terrorist organisation, rightly. Expressing support for them is rightly a criminal offence. And the fact there are people in this country who think that it's appropriate on the second anniversary of a massacre to express support for the organisation responsible is absolutely despicable, and we must fight that sentiment with everything we have. And that should include applying our terror laws robustly. And those people who express support for Hamas have committed a criminal offence because they're openly supporting a prescribed terrorist organisation. They should be prosecuted. I think people in this country who are here on visas, so temporarily, who are not British citizens, if they express support for terrorism or extremism, or express racial or religious hatred, including anti-Semitism, but also any form of racial or religious hatred, frankly, should be removed. And that will send a signal, won't it, that it's not acceptable.
Thanks so much, Chris. That's really great to hear your thoughts on all these issues. I think we'll go to some audience questions now. We have until 1:45. Please make sure that it is a question and keep your question as brief as possible so we can get through a few. Please state your name and the organisation or constituency association you are from. I'll start with the lady here.
Hi, my name's Jess Kane.
Sorry, could you just wait for the mic? Sorry. Wait for the mic. We are being live streamed.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I didn't tell you.
Hi, my name's Jess Kane and I'm from Woking. I've seen on social media that you've been going abroad and you've been documenting conditions in other countries. So what would you do if you were in government? From those first-hand experiences that you've seen, what would you then apply to in government?
Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the things maybe you're referring to is my slightly unusual summer holiday this year, when I decided to go to northern France, to the area around Calais and Dunkirk. And one of the things I did was I visited the illegal migrant camp just outside Dunkirk at a place called Grand Centre. And this is where the camp contains about 2,000 people. And they're people who are waiting to basically cross the English Channel on small boats. The camps are run by people smugglers. They're run by Albanian and Kurdish people smugglers. There are no French police in sight at all. There's an NGO there handing out food and charging people's mobile phones. And so I went there to find out what was going on. And I've got to be honest, it was quite an unsettling experience. So I spoke to some of the migrants, and I'll come in a minute to what they said. I did spot a people smuggler going through the camp carrying this sort of massive bag full of life jackets. So I decided to go and confront him and ask what he was doing, what was going on, and why he was apparently engaged in people smuggling. This did not go down very well, as you can imagine. And shortly after, someone showed up brandishing a machete. And as we beat a hasty retreat, we got pelted with bottles and stones. So that was a bit of an unusual holiday experience. But I recommend it for anyone. I'll start running package tours. And but I also did speak to quite a few of the migrants who were there. And I was interested in knowing why they were planning to get on a dinghy to come to the UK when they were already in France, which is a safe, civilised country. There's no war going on in France. No one's getting persecuted in France. You don't need to flee from France to come to the UK. These journeys were totally unnecessary, besides, of course, being dangerous in some cases and illegal in all cases. And the migrants that I spoke to, some on camera, some wanted to be anonymous, knew a few things. They knew that when they got to the UK, the Labour government would put them up in a hotel at taxpayers' expense, at our expense. They knew they had a very high chance of their asylum claim being granted, and they knew they could work illegally. And by the way, another visit I made was to an asylum hotel in central London, and I discovered a compound next to the hotel that had been created by the Home Office full of Deliveroo and Just Eat bikes, which were being used by the migrants in the hotel for illegal working. So the migrants in Calais knew they could easily work illegally in the UK, but most importantly of all, they knew the chances of getting removed from the UK were virtually zero. So that last point reinforced powerfully a conclusion that I had in any case reached, which was that the only way to deter these crossings is that if people who make these dangerous, illegal and unnecessary crossings must be immediately or very near immediately removed, either back to their country of origin if that is safe and possible, or to a third country, for example Rwanda, if not. And if that happens, very quickly people will just stop bothering attempting the crossing. Because why would you cross the channel to leave France if you know you're going to wind up either in your country of origin or some other place like Rwanda? And it is exactly that approach which worked in Australia 12 years ago and is working in America as we speak. And it doesn't take long. It takes a matter of a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, before the deterrent effect kicks in. And it was that point about the deterrent effect that struck me most powerfully. And I was also having lunch today with a journalist who happened to be in Dublin at around about the time, in Ireland, at around about the time the Rwanda scheme was due to commence before the courts squashed it using the ECHR. And they said, as a journalist, they were interviewing migrants who had just arrived in Dublin. And it turned out the migrants they interviewed had come from the UK, and they said they'd come from the UK because they were worried about the imminent implementation of the Rwanda scheme, which the court then subsequently prevented. So the main lesson I drew from those interviews in the camps when I wasn't dodging machetes and bottles was the importance of the deterrent effect.
Great. I'm going to do 2 at a time. So I'll, Sir, and then at the back there.
Thank you. Alistair Stewart from Croydon. The very first political campaign I took part in was No to ID, but we're no longer a high-trust society. So I do think that we actually need to move to having ID cards, not just for employment to address the illegal working you referenced, but for the NHS, for benefits and everything else. Do you not think that having ID cards to tackle the illegal migrants who are here, who are not in the system, also needs to be part of this solution?
Okay, so is there a case for ID cards? And then the gentleman at the back.
Hello, Chris.
Hello.
Yes, I am from Hong Kong under BNO visa. I would like to ask you if any changes to the immigration is going to affect current arrival of Hong Kong immigrants as well as Ukrainian refugees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So is there a case for ID cards and the status of Hong Kong and Ukrainian?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Alistair, firstly, thank you for all of your help and support campaigning in Croydon, the borough I have the honour to represent in Parliament. On ID cards, I think mandatory universal ID cards are something, as you'll have seen, we're pretty cautious about or negative on. I mean, partly on the principle of making everybody carry an ID card, which is not something we've ever done in this country before. And secondly, I'm also deeply sceptical about the government's ability to deliver large-scale IT projects without wasting colossal amounts of our money. I'm not sure I've yet encountered a successful government-run large-scale IT project. I think when it comes to accessing taxpayer-funded services, and you've mentioned like welfare and the NHS being the most obvious two, I do think we need to do more to make sure people are entitled to access those services. And I know that some NHS providers are very squeamish about verifying people's entitlement. So we need to do a lot more to verify people's entitlement, particularly to those two things, welfare and the NHS at the point of access, which doesn't necessarily need to entail some kind of universal ID card system, but just better systems join up and better checking to make sure only people who are entitled get access to taxpayer-funded services. That's a question of fairness. It's unfair that we pay our taxes, and then if people from anywhere in the world who manage to get here can access things that they've never contributed to, that is fundamentally unfair. If I went to the USA or to France or Australia or anywhere in the world, frankly, any country, I would not expect to get paid welfare or have elective surgery in those countries. I might expect to get treatment if I was involved in like a road accident, right, emergency treatment, but I wouldn't expect to get elective treatment. On the BNO question, so this is British nationals overseas. These are people who live in Hong Kong, and because of the repression by the Chinese Communist Party, we are allowing them to come to the UK. About roughly 200,000 BNOs have arrived, of which this gentleman obviously is one. Welcome. And no, we don't have any plans to change the status of BNOs who have come to the UK from Hong Kong and very often are working hard and making a contribution. And I think the BNO scheme is a good example to demonstrate that where there are people who are genuinely in need, you know, we will show compassion and generosity. We did the same during the Syrian conflict, where we set up a legal migration scheme called the UKRS, the UK Resettlement Scheme. And between about 2015 and 2020, approximately 5,000 people a year we brought directly from refugee camps on the Syrian border, like in Jordan, for example, to the UK. But that was done legally. We selected who came over. We prioritised women and children instead of the Channel crossing situation, where mostly young men, contrary to what Darren Jones idiotically said on Question Time a few weeks ago, it's mostly young men are paying people smugglers to get here. That's got to be stopped entirely. And when it is stopped entirely, we can then run limited, targeted humanitarian schemes for those people that our democratically elected government decides we'd like to help.
Great. The gentleman here and then the lady in the green there.
Thank you. Paul Galley, leader of the Blackpool Conservative Group. Following the Baroness Casey report, the government promises a full inquiry on child grooming gangs. There's a large amount of expectation that they're going to water that down, and we're not going to get the full inquiry that the people of this country deserve. What are you doing to ensure that that doesn't happen and we do get that full inquiry?
Absolutely.
And
That's a great question.
I'm Sarah Darcy from the charity Surviving Economic Abuse. Given that 4.1 million women in the UK experienced an abusive partner using money and economic resources to control and abuse them, I want to know how you will hold the Labour government to account in delivering its mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade.
Yeah, okay, two excellent questions. You'll take three or we do two?
Well, let's do two.
Two's fine.
Yeah.
That was a brilliant question. So when it came out earlier this year in January that Oldham Council had requested a full national inquiry and that the government had refused it, Kemi and I immediately backed Oldham Council and backed the victims and survivors of the rape gangs in demanding that inquiry. And you know what Keir Starmer's first reaction was when that happened? I think it was on the 6th of January. He was at a press conference and he was asked about this. And Keir Starmer accused campaigners calling for a rape gang inquiry, independent, national, statutory rape gang inquiry. He said we were jumping on a far-right bandwagon. It is not a far-right bandwagon for victims and survivors and for people like me and Kemi to call for justice. That is not a far-right bandwagon. But it tells you the kind of mindset that Keir Starmer has. We then relentlessly, we and the campaigners, relentlessly held the Labour government to account over the succeeding months to the point where we had a vote scheduled in Parliament it was sometime, I think it was in the middle of June. And 2 days before that vote, 2 days before the vote, they capitulated and agreed to the statutory national inquiry. It's important that they'd previously offered informal inquiries in 5 areas. Now, that's unacceptable because, firstly, there are 50 towns affected, not 5. Some of the towns, like Bradford, are refusing to have any inquiry at all. And if the inquiry isn't statutory under the 2005 Inquiries Act, it means it doesn't have the power to compel the production of evidence, written evidence, or to compel witnesses to attend. And we saw actually right here in Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, the Labour mayor, commissioned a Greater Manchester inquiry, and this time, I think it was about a year ago, or just over a year ago, the 2 chairs of that inquiry resigned because public authorities in Manchester were refusing, even as recently as last year, to hand over the evidence, and that's why it's got to be national and it's why it's got to be statutory. Now, what has happened since they capitulated back in June? Basically nothing. Heard nothing at all. Jess Phillips has gone uncharacteristically silent. It's about the only time I've ever heard her be silent during her 10 years in Parliament. And now I've heard reports from victims and survivors in places like Oldham that the government may be currently attempting to somehow water down the nature of the inquiry itself. So when Parliament resumes next week, high on my agenda is going back, probably with an urgent question or something like that, in Parliament to hold Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, and Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips to account to keep the promises they made, because they appear once again to be on the cusp of breaking their promises and letting down victims. We will not rest until they get justice. And on the question about the government's work to support women who are the victims of violence, or in the case you go, I think your charity you said works in terms of financial coercion. Again, the government have not yet published, have they, their strategy for violence against women and girls. Again, that is supposed to be Jess Phillips' responsibility, and they haven't done it. I think the deadline they set themselves has now expired, so they're late. So we will certainly be holding them to account for that, and carefully scrutinising that VORG, violence against women and girls strategy, to include the element of financial coercion you mentioned. I guess it's something people don't immediately think of, but it is really important. I think you said 4.1 million women were the victims of this form of coercive behaviour. coercive and controlling behaviour is, of course, a criminal offence, and so we need to make sure that police forces are adequately aware of it so they can identify it and prosecute where appropriate. But I'm interested if I can just ask you a question. What if there's one thing you would like to see the government do to address the issue that your charity specifically works on? What is the one thing you'd really want us to be raising with the government?
Lots of things.
No, choose one. You've got to As someone once said, the language of politics is of priority, so you've got to choose one.
I think what the Conservative Party could do is build on the partnerships that you were creating with financial services firms to get businesses and other areas of the private sector really engaged in tackling this and changing those systems that we know abusers are misusing to weaponise, to cause economic harm, whether it's joint mortgages, coercing survivors into debt, or divorce and financial remedy proceedings. There's lots of potential legislation in the works, so cohabitation law reform is on the way. So I really think a strong, Conservative opposition on those would be really helpful.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
We are only a couple of minutes left, so two quick-fire ones, literally seconds. The lady there and the gentleman there.
Blimey.
One line.
Does that apply to me as well?
As long as you like. We've got to wrap up for your benefit.
Jamal of Richmond Association, as Ambassador of Peace and U.S. Institution for Diplomacy and Human Rights, I would like to ask about human trafficking and how we can support each other in ending slavery.
Okay. How do we stop human trafficking? And gentleman there.
Today, 2 years to the day since the October 7th massacre in Israel, the government has started to allow Palestinian civilians who we know may have taken part in those atrocities. Do you believe the government are checking before they allow more extremists in our country? And what are your thoughts on this new policy from the government, which they've kept very quiet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the French, I'll take them in reverse order. The French government actually, I think, stopped allowing students from Gaza into French universities after they identified the fact some of the students coming from Gaza into France were extremists. And it's quite telling that neighbouring Arab countries, such as Egypt, are not allowing anyone from Gaza to go into countries like Egypt. And it's a question worth considering or pondering as to why it is that neighbouring Arab countries like Egypt are not allowing anyone in. So I am concerned about the government's policy, and I am near certain they are not doing the relevant checks. In fact, it's very hard to imagine how they could do the checks, given they haven't got access to the information they would need. So it is deeply concerning. And I even saw some suggestion that students being allowed in would be entitled to bring family members with them, which I think would be a ridiculous and absurd thing to do. And on the question about trafficking, it's a big question. Clearly, targeting organised criminals is an important part of that, and the National Crime Agency should be tasked with doing that more. But we also need to consider why the trafficking happens. And there's always a pull factor of some kind. Often it involves exploitative illegal working. And so by clamping down on illegal working, and in particular exploitative illegal working here in the UK, by clamping down on that, it will also reduce the pull factor, which incentivises trafficking in the first place.
Chris, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
We do have to wrap up there, but just thank you very much for joining us here on the Tuesday of conference. Onward will be publishing reports on many subjects, including prison reform, foreign national offenders, over the coming weeks. So please do look out for our output. We were talking about many issues on the Home Office brief and others as well. So watch out for what we have coming out of Onward over the coming weeks. Thanks once again.
Brilliant. Thank you.